All right, Jillian, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Hello and welcome to today's virtual history presentation by the Baltimore Architecture Foundation and Baltimore Heritage. My name is Jillian Storms. I co-host the Dead Architects Society, BAF's research committee, and Baltimore Heritage's slides here. And oops, too fast. Baltimore Architecture Foundation's slide is here. Thank you to everyone who donated to be with us. Today marks our 30th virtual history and our last virtual history of the year. It's thanks to you that the support we have, with the support you've been giving us, we've been able to host these presentations nearly every week since April. We will be taking a break for the holidays, but we'll be back on January 8th. Oops, too fast. I'll be presenting on Nisa Hutt, the architect, who she's a trailblazer in making modern architecture in Baltimore. Here's a picture of her captured. And she's research we did after the exhibit that we put together. So I'd love to be able to present her to the public. And now for today's presentation, we have, in addition to Baltimore Architecture Foundation and Baltimore Heritage, today's program is presented in cooperation with the Friends of Maryland Olmsted Parks and Landscapes, as well as the Maryland chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects, who I believe currently are residing in the new center. So that's kind of cool. 2002 will be the bicentennial of the birth of Frederick Law Olmsted. Over 100 years, he and the Olmsted firm completed thousands of projects, introducing parks and green spaces across America, including here in Maryland. And to mark that anniversary, Friends of Maryland Parks and Landscapes, as well as the Maryland chapter for American Society of Landscape Architects and BAF will be partnering to put together Olmsted 200 in coordination with the national efforts. So anyway, look for stuff on that in the coming year. You can learn more about the program on olmsted.org. Now for today's presenter, Ed Orser is a professor emeritus. I always say that word wrong, sorry. Someone can correct me. Of American Studies at UMBC. He's the former president of the Friends of Maryland Olmsted Parks and Landscapes. He has taught and conducted research on the social and environmental history of Baltimore. His books include Blockbusting in Baltimore, the Edmondson Village Story, and the Gwynns Falls, Baltimore Greenway to the Chesapeake Bay. If you have questions for Ed, please add them to the chat box and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And with that, Ed, take it away. Oh, I have to stop share. I'm not sure I'm hearing Ed.
I'm not either. Is everything going okay, Ed?
It says I can't start the video because the host has stopped it.
There we go. And go ahead and hit screen share.
All right.
It's a little green button at the center. Yeah.
And to advance, yeah, okay.
There you go.
All right. Well, welcome. This is a topic that I find quite interesting, and I've probably bitten off more than I can chew and more than you can chew today. So be prepared for a wild ride. But I continue to be impressed with the major impact that the Olmsted firm had in laying the foundation for Baltimore's modern park system. As Jillian mentioned, the Olmsted impact in Baltimore is quite lengthy. In the 1870s, Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. Did plans for Mount Vernon Place, those didn't actually last forever, but that got the Olmsted footprint started here. And so today we're going to look at the impact of the Olmsteds, but it's going to be in particular with the son and stepson as the firm continued. So,
And before you start, go to the top of your screen. It says slideshow. You need to actually press that so that we see the full screen. Slideshow, and then you can press from the start.
my screen where?
Slideshow is at the center bar, at the top of the bar. Otherwise, we could probably still do this. It just won't be full screen.
I can't seem to get to it. I don't know why not.
Yeah, it's because you are probably seeing yourself on the screen. So I'm not sure.
If you hit that presentation button we did earlier today, it should work. I don't think you clicked it all the way right at the beginning, right there. Click it again.
Hit it real hard, I guess.
Better?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get our technical glitches out of the way altogether. Thank you.
It was not my strength. When I mention Olmsted, almost everyone I speak to will say, oh yeah, we've heard of Olmsted. And when I ask which parks they know, they always say Central Park, even though of course he was involved with hundreds of parks across the country. But they very seldom actually bring up the stepson and son who picked up the mantle from him beginning in the 80s and 90s with her stepson, John Charles, and then his younger natural son, Frederick Jr., known as Rick in the family apparently, coming along as a very young person in the 1890s. But by 1904, he was very much involved in Baltimore. 1903 was a very critical year for the Olmsteds. We often are hearing that name with quotes around it, because in that year, Frederick Sr., who had been ailing, passed away. Meanwhile, in that very same year, with that kind of trauma happening in the family, Frederick Jr. was in Baltimore doing the Baltimore plan, and stepson John was in Seattle doing the Seattle plan. And in between times, John was going to Portland and doing a Portland plan. So just absolutely incredible what this firm was doing, because of course it wasn't easy to get to these places. Certainly for Seattle, it was a long train trip, getting the maps and the other details that were needed. But just imagine doing all that in this one year. The plan that Frederick Jr. produced and was published and presented in 1904 was a very extensive report, 120 pages, reprinted, by the way, by the Friends of Maryland's Olmsted Parks and Landscapes. And in it, it really was looking toward the future of Baltimore. Baltimore was anticipating annexation, but the boundaries weren't clear. So the Olmsted plan in 1904 really took into account possible expansion into the surrounding area. Baltimore was the 5th largest city in the country, and it aspired to be world-class. The Municipal Art Society had sponsored this study, which was then presented to the Baltimore Park Commission. And in it, the report outlined 4 major types of parks with some variations within those. But if you look at the map, you can see what really stood out to Frederick Jr. The stream valleys, running north-south from the Patapsco to the Gwynns Falls, to the Jones Falls, to Herring Run. He was always, and the firm was always taking very much account of the topography. You see also the large parks, parklands that already had been carved out. And then if you were looking closely at this map, you would even see down to little dots to where playground should go. The first type of park that the report talks about is the large multipurpose park. And Frederick Jr. was very much impressed with Druid Hill Park in Paterson. Druid Hill Park serving the whole central part of the city, Paterson Park on the east side. Druid Hill in the report, and Frederick really is pretty much the author, so I'll act as if he's the one saying these things, really recognized the beauty and value of many of the parks, but especially Druid Hill. And Druid Hill, of course, had been established in 1860. So at the same time, the Olmsteds made recommendations on additions that could be made to Druid Hill and to many other parks around the city. Patterson Park, the report felt was absolutely essential for the east side of the city. It wasn't easy for people on the east to get over to Druid Hill. So they needed a park that some ways resembled Druid Hill Park, but it did need more playground and active recreation space. And the Olmsteds eventually did a little bit of design for the lower tier of Patterson Park, bathing facilities, athletic fields, and the extension of the park to the east. They also thought, the report also thought that there was a real need for small multi-purpose urban parks, and I've singled out two that are very special for me. One is Wyman Park Dell, which a number of you have been involved with efforts there to upgrade it, and that's really been a real benefit. The Olmsted principles evident there in such a small space are, I think, very classic Olmsted designs. The curve of the valley floor looks like it could just go on forever, as it does at Prospect Park in Brooklyn. It doesn't go on forever. It goes for no more than about a block, but it gives you that feeling. Latrobe Park in Locust Point is an active recreation park, and we're going to talk about each of those. Again, Wyman Park Dell, the valley floor, the ring of hardwood forest around, gives one a sense of the beauty of a much larger park, here nestled in tucked into a very urban corner. Latrobe Park serves a very densely developed row house neighborhood, already densely developed by then. And so although it has scenic portions, it also has active recreation portions. If you look at this design on the left, you see the big oval there at the top. That's marked as the men's gymnasium. It's a track. There are in the lower part facilities for women. Obviously they are smaller, but they at least are set aside, and there's areas for children. These structures that you see on the right side are structures that actually date to the Olmsted era. On the right is a shelter covering the sandbox for children. On the left is a facility that most people think was providing shade for those who are watching over the children, mostly women. A shout out to the Locust Point Civic Association, because they, in working with the Department of Recreation and Parks, which should be congratulated too, have done some major makeover of the park, and it's very true to Olmsted principles. The second type of park facility they felt was very important was playgrounds. The paragraph I have here from the report begins with if, because they felt if it's agreed that it's so important that there be playground facilities, they should really be as essential as schoolrooms. And the Olmsted firm had kind of struggled with some other cities, including and with Baltimore, because they really thought the city schools should be building and financing these playgrounds near the neighborhoods where children came from. But if it's important, and if the schools aren't going to do it, then it needs to be done. And unless city after city, the Olmsteds began to learn the lesson that this really needed to be a park function. A third type of park, which was really kind of new to Baltimore and perhaps in some ways new elsewhere, was the idea of stream valley parks. The Olmsted report was really very struck with the beauty of the stream valleys. Here the quote, "charming scenery is to be found along the stream." And the Gwynns Falls on the west, the Herring Run on the east had the most potential. The Jones Falls, the report noted, already had been highly industrialized and had less potential, but they really focused a lot on the Herring Run and the Gwynns Falls. So they strongly recommended that the watershed along the Gwynns Falls on the west side be purchased, the land be purchased and be set aside as a stream valley park. This would be a park that would be essentially a preserve nature preserve. It would set aside the scenery that they found so beautiful, but they always also were very struck with the importance of the impact that could happen if the city didn't buy this land and secure it. Because if they didn't, it would be overdeveloped and it would create all kinds of environmental and other kind of utilitarian problems. On the one hand, Frederick Jr. is sort of championing the idea of the scenery. On the other hand, he's saying, be practical. If you secure this land before it gets developed, it'll be much better for the city. A fourth type of park, and often we may not think of it as a park, would be boulevards and parkways. They really believed, and particularly in the Baltimore Park plan, as much as in the Seattle Park plan, connectors that were park-like that would get people from one park to another through a park-like experience, they felt was very important. Ideally, they would be meandering roadways, they would be tree-lined, they would give a person a sense of the kind of quiet and experience of nature that they would look forward to as they went into a park. So it would be a way, in a sense, to experience that. 33rd Street, of course, became one of the major parkways that they had recommended, because the challenge was, how do you get east to west connecting parks? Already, the real problem was that much of the access that would be provided east to west was already being developed. And no sooner had 33rd Street been put in fact, really before 33rd Street was put in as a parkway, there already were row houses and detached houses lining the street. Certainly it's more aptly described as a boulevard, but it is tree lined and it is very, very much valued. You see in the center slide a typical section of 33rd Street. On the right side, you see a very recent, very successful attempt to connect that parkway experience to Charles Street, providing access down the middle for pedestrian and bicycle use. The Olmsted Report of 1904 was well received. It sort of represented a footprint for the way that the city park department, park commission at that time it was called, really wanted to go. I love this 1914 illustration of the Baltimore Sun, linking our great park system by boulevards. They really got it. They got the Olmsted concept. So you notice here on the right side, there's Patterson Park, which is then linked by boulevard with, or parkway with Clifton Park, which then proceeds along the Alameda, 33rd Street, over to the Homewood campus and kind of around the Homewood campus at Wyman Park and Wyman Park Dell to connect with Druid Hill Park, proceeding westward on Gwynns Falls Parkway to the Gwynns Falls Stream Valley Park, and then coming on down the Gwynns Falls, connecting to Carroll Park. Really a ring around the city that would be provided by these various boulevards. In the 1900s and early 1910s, the Olmsted Company did a great deal of work in helping the Department of Recreation and Parks, or Park Commission as it was called then, to purchase needed parkland to augment each of those park areas that where it was needed, and to do many, many plans across Baltimore parks for additions and improvements. 1926, the Olmsted Company was asked to come back again. The annexation of surrounding territory had happened in 1918. Baltimore had gotten as much extra space as it would get. Too bad, I think, frankly, that was the last annexation, because Baltimore suffers from being sort of landlocked. But the Olmsted plan now had been in place, and the city was ready to look toward the future. And so in 1926, they asked the Olmsted Company to come back and do a follow-up study. It would be a report that would look to the park needs for the year 1950. Isn't that pretty amazing? Looking ahead, looking ahead. It was really very impressive, the sort of optimism and confidence that that report recognized. The 1926 report directed many of the projects toward the annex area. Of course, this was the area that was all new for Baltimore City responsibility. I've just a couple of excerpts, examples that aren't necessarily from the annex area, but many of those projects were. So these were a little different than the 1904 plan. The 1904 plan looked at the whole park system. This one was looking at specific parks or park spaces that needed to be added and with making recommendations on how they should be addressed. The example I'm going to use a little bit following up on the 1926 report is Gwynns Falls Park for two reasons. One is that it's clear from both the 04 report and the 1926 report that Frederick Jr. was quite taken with this valley, as he was also with Herring Run Valley. The words that he uses often in the report are very glowing. I'm very appreciative of the natural beauty of this or potential for this area. The other reason is because I'm a West Sider. And this is a park that's near and dear to me. It's not known very well to a lot of people. In fact, I often feel I'm not going to tell you there's a lane like that that's as beautiful as it is. That's the mill race section of Gwynns Falls Park. And it's an area that I find one of the loveliest in the city, and that I find when I take visitors to see it, they're most shocked by. And that is the beauty of it. The 1926 report already recognized the work the Olmsted Company had done, helping the park department secure lower parts of the Gwynns Falls from Edmondson Avenue up to Windsor Mill Road. This report recommended that it be continued now because the city limits had been extended out beyond Dickeyville, that it be extended all the way to the city line, and indeed it was. The 1926 report also was very glowing about a particular tributary of the Gwynns Falls, which had the unfortunate name of Dead Run, but it's the stream that runs beside Franklintown Road as that winding road follows the valley coming in toward the city from Franklintown on the west. Frederick Jr. had been particularly taken with that valley. In fact, he said that it felt that it was remarkable that such scenery could be found by then within the limits of a major American city. And he felt that if there was any chance to secure that land, it should be secured. In 1939, he had the opportunity to follow up on that feeling, because he was brought in to try to settle a very contentious debate happening in the city, political, social, economic, racial perhaps. All of those elements were involved. J. Wilson Leakin, who was a Baltimore attorney, had left property to the city in his will in the 1920s with the understanding that the sale from that property could be used, the money could be used to purchase a park. A single part. There were some efforts to divide the money up, but it had to be a single part. And it should have the name Leakin attached to it. His grandfather had been a mayor, and he wanted that name to be recognized. I won't go in, and it's a very extended debate, frankly, very extended controversy that occurred. At one point, there were as many as 200 sites around the city that were all vying for the Leakin Bequest and the park to be in their neighborhood. It came down, though, to two proposals. One was for basically extended kind of playground type facility in the Jonestown area, so it'd be very inner city. The other was for the Winans Estate, which had become available for sale on the west side. The Winans Estate included the uplands along Windsor Mill Road, but also the lower areas of the valley of the Dead Run along Franklintown Road, those very areas that Frederick Jr. had been so much valuing. And when he was brought in to make his own recommendation, he commented, as I quote here, that it's so nearly in a condition, just as it now is, to be a very beautiful and valuable park, a type of park which is notable for its exceptional natural landscape of a sort very keenly enjoyable in a quiet, leisurely way by many kinds of people. The result of his recommendation, I think his recommendation was kind of the tipping point, was in the 1940s, the city in two purchases, 1941 and 1948, did secure the Winans Estate for Leakin Park. There you see the Orianda House, which had been the Winans Mansion. I'll conclude by just sort of summing up what I see as the Olmsted imprint on Baltimore's parks. 40 projects entered into their books, numbered in their records over 75 years. Very substantial comprehensive park plans of 1904 and 1926. New to those plans were securing the stream valleys and also creating parkways. The latter not nearly with what had been the hope that they would be park-like and meandering as intended, but nevertheless, there were a number installed. They continued throughout this whole period to consult on park plans and land acquisition. That was a very important part, particularly during that period from 1904 up until 1926, because with the annexation, the city was very much involved in securing the parklands, and the company worked closely with them. And they continue to provide a great deal of advice and engagement. Most of their specific recommendations were for small additions, and they preferred not to do that. They really like to do whole parks. But almost every park in Baltimore that was existing by that, and that's an exaggeration, but so many by this point had Olmsted plans conducted in their parks. And then I'll add there at the bottom, if you think about the example of playgrounds and play fields, which were really new to the Olmsteds and which they've been somewhat resistant to, they were asked to do quite a few of those in Baltimore. Frederick Jr., I can remember reading a letter he wrote in 1904 where he had met with some of the leaders of Baltimore's playground and playfield associations, and he speaks of a lady who sat next to him. He said, made a very impressive case for the need for playgrounds. So I think that Baltimore really taught the Olmsteds a thing or two. We're all, of course, thankful that our parks are here now. This last year has been so difficult for all of us, but the parks have really experienced a kind of renaissance, a kind of rebirth. People have discovered them. I find that in Gwynns Falls Leakin Park. I have neighbors who don't even know where it is, or didn't know where it was until they found a need to be outside the house in some private and safe space. So I think we all owe a great debt to the Olmsteds and their legacy. So thank you very much for sharing very quickly a whole lot of things about the Olmsted impact in Baltimore.
Awesome, thank you, Ed. I'm looking through the chat, and so far we have one question. If you have any questions for Ed, please put them in here. Did the Olmsted's affirmative, oops, it moved on me, affirmatively plan, a plan for equal parks and park access for all?
Well, it's a good question. And I know there's a lot of consideration right now of how well balanced the city is in terms of park space. Of course, the reality is that as the city developed from its earliest days, there wasn't very much space left. If you look at that Olmsted report map of 1904 that I had up on the screen, there was very little green space in the center then. It wasn't a matter of prejudice or discrimination. It simply was that as the city got built and got built up, there wasn't space. There were some, as you know, some squares that were really primarily put in by developers to enhance the value of the properties around them. I think the faith, though, that they did not really face up to taking head on the question of how do you retrofit the city? And I think that's obviously the even bigger challenge we have today because there are not those historic green spaces prior to prior to, let's say, 1860 with Druid Hill, and playing catch up with areas that have already been overdeveloped is a serious task.
Okay, we've got a couple more.
Ed, could you just go to your last slide?
Maybe.
Just because it has some information on it,
Let's see, how
which
do I
people
do
might find helpful.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, indeed. Jillian, thanks for reminding me.
I was trying to put it in the chat box, but I'm not sure I caught everything.
No, you did. It's very important because Jillian has provided some links to how to find many of the kinds of documents that we were looking at in the slide today, from the Friends of Maryland's Olmsted Parks and their website, from the Olmsted Research Guide that she has there, the Olmsted Archives on Flickr, which are wonderful, and the
Yeah, and I put a lot of those in the chat so people have the direct link that can just touch on it. We'll take them right to the site. I did want to point out these wonderful hard copy displays on the screen, including the 1904 plan and the 1926 plan, are available through the Olmsted Committee. You can order it online at their website. And I think that was put in the chat box at the very start of this presentation. So I just wanted to make sure you didn't miss out on letting people know they could have a piece of history right in their own hands.
Well, I'm glad you did, because both of those documents are really quite thorough and really quite fascinating. The Olmsted collection of the Friends of Maryland's Olmsted Parks and Landscape is housed at the Baltimore City Archives. One can, in better days, research directly there, but also, as Jillian mentioned, it's online as well.
And we did have a couple other questions come in. We still got time for a few more. Have all the recommendations made in the 1904 and 1926 reports been implemented, or are communities still trying?
Well, communities may not be so aware of those reports by now, frankly, so it's a little hard to see if there's still continuity. My observation, and others who've worked with this may certainly know better, if you look at much of the work that the Olmsteds did in Baltimore, aside from those reports, it was a matter of rather specific projects at specific parks. So it wasn't necessarily creating a whole new park. It was adding a certain element to the park. I mean, they did 4 or 5 projects around Druid Hill, but they were more adding on to Druid Hill Park rather than creating a new park.
Let's see, we've got a few more. If the chat keeps moving around. Were any of the greenways that go down the middle of the parkways actually used for streetcars and then converted back?
Well, that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about that. I'm not sure that I'm aware that that's the case, although some people watching may be and could chip who memory or awareness goes back to those good old streetcar days could mention that. I'm not aware that that happened. Jillian had used the word boulevard too, and she and I were talking about this because Franklin and Mulberry at a point become boulevards with very thin median down the middle, which at one point had trees, but wasn't as wide, for example, as 33rd Street or Gwynns Falls Parkway. But even those,
I was surprised, Ed, when I downloaded when I came across the Broadway squares on the Flickr site that the Olmsted Archives has, and it's great. I mean, they look like I don't know, almost a wallpaper because there's just so many because it was so long. And I'm not sure all of them got built if they stopped short of where they wanted to go, because originally they wanted to go all the way up to connect Patterson Park with Clifton. But I didn't notice that there was any kind of central tram going down that. And I would have always assumed on Broadway you would have had that. So it might have been to one side or the other, but it wasn't in the park plan.
Oh.
All right, one last question, and then it'll go to Jillian for any final remarks. This needs to stop moving when I'm reading it. How well does the current design of Charles Street past Johns Hopkins reflect Olmsted's intent?
Well, that's not a question I feel real comfortable answering, just from lack of knowledge, frankly. I know a little less well that part of the city. People like Sandy Sparks, I would say, who've worked so hard in trying to see that Charles Street was in fact true to many of the Olmsted plans and many of the plans of others, and many of those things have been accomplished. But as you go north, Charles Street then goes into Guilford, and the Olmsteds were very much involved with Guilford in the planning. We haven't even talked about the residential communities that they were doing at the same time, frankly, with Roland Park and Guilford and Homeland and so forth. I'll have to pass on actually the actual design of those streets.
Okay. Well, with that, do we have any final remarks, Jillian? You're on mute.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yes. Well, I hope everybody enjoys their holiday and has a chance to, if you have time on your hands, go through the wonderful virtual histories that have already been uploaded to the AIA Baltimore BAF's YouTube site. So that's been put in the chat, that link, and there's been 30 altogether. So if you haven't seen them all, they're really fantastic. And like I said, I will be giving the next one when we return in the new year on January 8th. So we'll see you then.
Awesome. Thank you.